So I see a lot of people out there and a lot of empty space up here. Anybody want to move up? Come on, you're like, I can't even barely see you back there. Can you hear me? Yeah? In the back? Everywhere? Okay, good. If you don't want to move, you don't have to move. I'm the Director of Security Services now at Security Innovation, and like I said, I'm in charge of a bunch of the services, so training and code reviews and pen tests. But what I'm here to talk to you guys about today is moving from a kind of a test-based organization, which means like we build a bunch of software, and then we don't really think about security, and then we hand it over to our testers, and the testers go, okay, let's go look for some vulnerabilities. And this is kind of how we've always done this in the past. But we've found that if you start thinking about security earlier, it actually turns out you build more secure software cheaper, better, faster, all those kinds of things. So I'm going to give you a few techniques today on how to do those things. And, by the way, not on any sort of script or anything, so if you do have any questions, pop a hand up and I'll call on you, and we can have a little chat and stuff. So, so a little bit about security innovation. We have product services and training. We just acquired a company called N-True, which does some really neat encryption, lattice-based encryption, which is neat because it doesn't break in quantum computers and stuff like that. Here's a little agenda. This is an enormous screen. I love it. Here's the agenda. We're going to talk about the application security maturity model, which is a kind of an interesting name for the whole model. But essentially, this just means how an organization becomes more secure over time, right? Do they dive into tools? Do they dive into training? Do they invest in external pen tests? And how they kind of like evolve that over time. And so we're going to dive into that in a second. Then we're going to give you some techniques to reduce your software's risk by managing your attack surface, which is essentially just your entry points into your application. We're going to turn those off, turn some features off, and then essentially have a more secure piece of software. Number 3 is in threat modeling. We're going to be talking about how to identify assets and entry points, how the attacker is going to see your system, and then kind of how you can shift your thinking about your application in order to be more secure. We'll talk a little bit about how to do design reviews, and then the big thing about what I want to talk about is to move from being very reactive, which is to say, essentially like giving that application over to the testers or the pen testers, even if they're external pen testers, and pushing all that stuff upstream. So we start thinking about it, the design phase, start thinking about it when we're writing our requirements or when we're talking to our customers. So we can start making good decisions early on. So what do you guys think? Sound good? Somebody signed up for? That's what you're expecting? All right. You weren't expecting such a handsome guy up here, though, right? Yeah. It's always surprising. So, depending on kind of what your whole model looks like already and what your process looks already, you might be using waterfall, you might be using agile. Just curious, who's using agile out there? All right. How's it working for you? Well? Yeah? All right, and everybody else is in waterfall mode still? Yeah, we got a little wibbly wobbly out there. Okay, so it doesn't really matter, okay, because at each, whether you're waterfall or you're agile, you probably have something like these phases up here. You have requirements and analysis, you have architecture and design, development, testing, deployment, and maintenance, right? And you're probably already doing a lot of these things up here, right? So you're already doing functional requirements, right? You're already doing technology requirements. You're probably doing unit testing. Yeah, okay, good. Like probably doing daily builds. Who's doing daily builds? Yeah? All right, good. And, and then as you go on to testing, you got integration testing and system testing and things like that. And those are kind of the things that we're already doing. And what I'm kind of saying is, you don't have to throw those things away. You don't have to like totally reorganize your entire process and like do kind of panic to add security. at each phase, we can add to these things security objectives, threat modeling, code reviews for security. We can add these little components, make ourselves more secure, and still stick to our same process. And so at each phase, we're going to be kind of talking about what to add. Now we need to think about how to add these things. Anybody see what's going on here? We have a security control in place, the little gate in the middle. And what happens? It's a big pain in the butt to get out. Maybe roll down my window. It's a cold day. Roll down my window, let the cold air in, and then swipe my card. It's a little easier to go around, right? So when we add our security controls, we also have to think about how they're going to be used and in what context, right? So on one hand, we have, let's say we have an authentication mechanism, right? And we're forcing people into this login screen, and we're working on that. And so, what happens when somebody simply requests the admin page directly? Are we going to do that redirection properly? Or what if they request a resource directly? If we allow them to bypass these security controls, they will. And that's just one of those things about human nature. So let's talk about the security maturity model. So on one side here, we have the tools and technologies of security. And on the bottom here, we have the people and processes. And as we go up the thing, we are adding tools and we're adding technologies such as we have source code scanning tools, we have testing tools, we have web app scanning tools, all those kinds of tools that we can purchase and apply, right? Those are really easy to do, right? Like we walk down to the thing and we say, well, your tool costs a lot, and so it must do a good thing, and so I will purchase your tool, and I'll come home and I'll plug it in, and I'll run my scan, and I'll look at the report, and the report will tell me how to be secure, right? Has anybody ever run one of those reports? And you understand everything that it says? And it gives you actionable things to do. And at the end of the report, after you're done reading the report, you have a secure system. Right? Right, no. So on the other side of the axis, we have people and process. And this is the train. This is what you're here for, right? This is the training part of things. It's getting experts into your system. Right, and so here we have, we start to integrate the SDL, the security into our SDL, our software development lifecycle. We start to train our staff. We start to train our developers, our testers. We get some red teams in there. We get some external pen tests in there, and we start to build our process into a better area. So, what we found is that people generally go through this phase. Right, so back here, over time, right, they start out over here, and they go, holy crap, we are totally vulnerable. Right now, if a hacker wanted to, they could steal everything. And usually this is precipitated by, maybe a CEO reading some interesting article somewhere. Maybe it's, somebody that came in from a different company and is looking around and goes, we have no idea what we're doing about security. We need to apply something right now, right? And so they look around and they say, well, if we go with training or we go with process, that's going to take us a long time, right? It's going to be challenging. It's going to be expensive. So how about, some vendor out there says, well, if you buy this network appliance, this deep packet inspector, this web application firewall, this source code scanner, whatever the tool or whatever it is, then you will be secure. And say, okay, get that in here. Come on, we need anything. Just buy it. And so they shoot up this axis. And then they start to do those scans, and they start to deploy those web application firewalls or packet inspectors or whatever. And they realize, this is the panic scramble, is when you purchase all those tools. And they realize they have no idea what they do, right? They have no idea why they're being more secure or if they're being more secure. They only know that they have a bunch of reports now that are telling them really how screwed they are. So they haven't really gotten that much more secure. So then they drop into this pit of despair where they're like, oh, we're never going to be secure. We're never going to get any better. And so over time, they start to realize, well, if we want to apply these tools the way that they're meant to be, we need to get some training in. We need to get some process. We need to improve our knowledge, right? And so they start to add process, and they start to add training and stuff like that, and they start to come up, and they start to realize that security can be part of their core business, part of their process. Now, those tools are really helpful, right? If you know how to use them, if you know what the report says, they can be really useful. But the important part is that you actually have to have the knowledge in order to use them. And so generally we see kind of a progression curve, and right now we actually plotted a lot of the companies that we work with on this thing. We found about 15% of people are in that panic scramble, like, holy crap, we need to do something. About 60% of our folks are in that middle area where they're starting to turn around and they're starting to understand what's going on. And then we have people that get it, and a lot of times these are the larger companies. So any questions on that so far? We're feeling pretty good? All right, good. So next I'm going to talk about reducing your software risk. Right? So here we have software that exposes our data via entry points, right? So all of our software does is interacts with the outside world. I had a professor that kind of distilled software down to a very easy to understand way, right? He said, software is easy. All it does is accepts input, processes that input, stores the input, and then outputs the input, right? Like, and outputs something. It does 4 things, right? So really, if you can get your input, your output, your data storage, and your processing right, it's done. But that's kind of challenging, right? Like, all right, there's a lot between just if we look at input, right? And so now let's just look at input. What entry points do we have here? We have clearly our user interface. We're used to interacting with that user interface, the text boxes, the drop-down list boxes, those kinds of things. What about web services that we call into? SOAP interfaces, JSON interfaces, all those kinds of things. They're all entry points into our application. What about libraries that we're calling into? Just last night, actually, I was doing a code review for a client, and scanned the whole source code. It's a Ruby application. And in Ruby, there's exactly one way to have SQL injection. And that's by using this, this one function called find by SQL. Anybody familiar with this Ruby function? So Ruby like extracts all this stuff away, and it's really cool. And so you're not really vulnerable to SQL injection unless you use this one function. And so I scanned for that function, and it's nowhere in their code base. And then we start to test, and we find a SQL injection vulnerability. And we're like, wow, that's weird. What happened? Another entry point, right? There's another way into the application. They happen to have installed a Ruby gem, which was vulnerable to cross-site scripting. And even though they were using that gem properly, that gem, what gem is like a module or a library for Ruby, and that gem was vulnerable. Well, crap, what do you do now? Rewrite it? Well, maybe. Try to sanitize your input on the way in? That's challenging. So kind of understanding the whole attack surface is really important. What about direct database access? A lot of people that I talk to are like, oh, well, once the data's in the database, it's safe, right? It's got in there. I put it in there, or at least I think I did. And when I get it out, why validate it again? Right? So once the data's in the database, it's free and clear, right? Anybody have any experience with not having valid data in a database? Yeah. So So now we can't even trust our database. We know we can't trust our users, especially in